Hi, good morning. So I want to actually help some of you who are maybe born in the last 45 years to understand what the 60s look like. See, this is a picture of the 60s. In fact, this is what a photograph looked like from the 60s. This is me in bed in my footy pajamas, and I have in my hand what you would call a tablet, but we called it a comic book. And those comic books showed us static images and stories, and we read these. And we also read science fiction written by Clark and Bradbury and Heinlein, and we dreamed about the future. We dreamed about a world in which we would have the wrist communicators, and we would have jetpacks, and we would have talking computers and robots, and even flying cars. Now, everything I just mentioned exists, except for maybe the flying car. Now we have the self-driving car. But all those amazing, prescient authors who imagined so many wonderful things didn't think of the most amazing invention since the beginning, or the creation of the alphabet. And that is the creation of the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web has brought together our entire planet. There are over 3.8 billion people connected on the World Wide Web at light speed. Now, that's pretty fast. A message can go around the planet 7.5 times in a second when it's traveling over the web. It's enabled so many amazing things to happen. Last year, I worked with NetScout Systems and Werner Herzog to build a film called, lo and behold, Reveries of the Connected World. And in that film, we interviewed Sebastian Thrun. And Sebastian Thrun was the inventor of the Google car. And Sebastian told us that the great thing about autonomous vehicles is that every newborn car is as smart as every car that came before it. You're born with all of the knowledge that it takes to travel through a city as a newborn autonomous vehicle. And that's kind of cool. And it's not just cars that are driving themselves, because also last year, Budweiser made the first fully autonomous beer run. They drove 120 miles down the highway. There was 2 drivers in the cab, but they weren't driving. And they delivered 50,000 cans of Budweiser using Auto Technology, which is a company that was a spin-out from Google, and it's owned by Uber. And so in the very near future, we're going to see a lot of 18-wheelers and semi-trucks driving down the road, and don't be surprised if maybe the guy's drinking a beer, because it won't matter, right? But when the beer gets to your destination, it also needs to get to your house. And how are you going to do that? Well, 7-Eleven's got this figured out, because they've deployed an air force of drones. And again, last year, 7-Eleven delivered 77 packages in Reno. They beat Amazon, they beat Walmart, and they're flying Slurpees and hot dogs through the air. Now, some of us who went to middle school know that flying Slurpees are not a good thing, but in this case, it may not be so bad. They can also deliver medicines, which is really interesting. But think about this. These drones are going to be part of our everyday life. Whether you think that's a good thing or not, it's going to happen. TEDx is a company that also believes that once you teach one robot how to do something, all the others should know it. So they created the 1 million robot challenge. And after you teach a robot how to perform a very delicate operation, such as lifting an egg, every other robot who taps into that cloud knows it. So if every one of these robots learns a different operation, then these robots are going to learn, well, 1 million times faster. And talking about robots, here's a pretty good sized one. This is the Falcon 5 rocket, which was built by Elon Musk's company, SpaceX. Now, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos of Amazon both have visions of going into space. And Elon has an intent to go to Mars with his BFR, his big F rocket. And it's a pretty glorious goal. And one of the things that Elon wants to do to be able to finance his mission to Mars is to launch 4,658 low Earth orbit satellites into space to surround our planet with broadband communications. And one way he's going to afford to do that is that, unlike NASA, Elon does not throw away his rockets. Every rocket that he sends up into space, he flies back down on Earth robotically, and it lands on a robotic barge. That's pretty good recycling, $60 million worth every time. Not a bad idea. So once we get this broadband communications network around the planet, a lot of things are going to become really interesting. For instance, these devices here are going to be able to charge themselves from radio waves. Jiva Wireless has figured out how to take vibrations from radio frequency and activate it and turn it into electrons. So now you don't have to change the batteries, which is going to be really good for people with pacemakers or hearing aids. And we have so many different sensors around the world. In fact, Cisco and Intel predict we're going to have 200 billion sensors by the year 2020. 200 billion things. Now, basically anything that is collecting data, whether it's temperature, humidity, moisture from the soil to help farmers plant their crops, is going to have an IP address and it's going to talk over the web. All this data is going to get collected, aggregated, and analyzed. And you'll have the tiniest sensor detecting moisture in soil to the largest sensors, which are driving combines and tractors down the fields of the prairies, and they're being driven with a resolution of 1 centimeter. That's a lot better than any farmer can control a device. So we're going into a very interesting world, and these things are going to instrument our lives. They're going to talk about our health and well-being, and they're also going to be part of everyday living. And the other thing that's part of all of our lives is the fact that this just happened. I mean, stop and think about it. The reason I started in the 60s is because back in the 60s, we wrote letters and we hand-delivered them. We had vinyl, and that went to VHS. But now, we send texts around the world at light speed, and we voice dictate. We talk to our computers, and they talk back to us. Vinyl and VHS have become MP3s and binging weekends on Netflix. All this stuff has just happened. And all the data that gets created is actually useful. Ajay Bangar, who is the CEO of MasterCard, was recently speaking to the Arab Investment Forum, and he told all of these oil sheiks that data is the new oil. So you're walking around with a computer in your pocket that is 1 million times, this is not just some number, 1 million times faster than the computers that were used to put the Saturn V rocket into space, the first rocket that put a man on the moon. 1 million times in your pocket. That's a big deal. And all these devices that are living in your house share that kind of power. And these devices in your house are, you know, your Alexa, your Google, your thermostat, maybe your refrigerator, but it's also simple things like your TV. TVs that can watch you and listen to you. In fact, Silverpush has worked with Procter & Gamble and a bunch of other companies to transmit ultrasonic beacons from your TV program to determine if you're in the room. Well, how do they know that? Because your phone is listening. And it tells them that Jim's in the room, or Ren's in the room, or Bob's in the room. And that's a really valuable thing for Procter & Gamble because they know if you're watching their program. And another thing that we might want to think about is what happens when we're surfing the web. Because there may be a computer on that kitchen desk, and when we go and visit that central location, which is CNET or the New York Times or Forbes, did you know that there are 40, 50, 60, maybe even 70 other parties listening to what you're doing? These are websites. This is an image of what happens when you go online. It's as if you went to a cocktail party to go talk to a dear friend of yours, and you're just about to lean over and talk about your chronic athlete's foot, and everybody surrounds you and listens in. It's a little bit disturbing, don't you think? And there are other things that we have to think about because all that data is being recorded and kept. So Google recently sent out their Minis, which is a smaller Google Home, and they sent a bunch of them to their directors, and they revealed that, oh, by the way, we didn't mention to you they're listening all the time. If you're an Android user, there are 234 apps that researchers found on the Android Play Store that are listening, you know, for beacons and also for human speech. They can recognize keywords. You know, as a marketer, and my background is in technology and marketing, it's so incredibly valuable to me to be able to know when you want to buy something. So if you're chatting with your friend about this car or that car, and I get to hear about that, isn't it a great time to step in and say, hey, I work at Mercedes, I want to sell you a car? That's what this technology can do. And that's why Google, you know, who recorded $89 billion last year, and Facebook, who just recorded their $20 billion quarter, make all that money. I mean, you would get these services, you know, when you search Google, you're searching 1 trillion pages of data, and it comes back in 3/4 of a second. That's a pretty amazing thing. It takes a lot of compute. Did you pay for those data centers? The answer is yes. You paid for it with your attention and with your time and your data. So this is a record of a trip that I took into the city with my wife, to celebrate her birthday and go shopping and have dinner with the kids. This is not a map that I created. This is a map of Google following what we did that day. And if you're curious as to where you were last year or the year before, you can log into your Google account and you can pull this up. It goes back 10 years. And if you ever said to Google, hey, where's the best place to get pizza in New York? That conversation's on their records. Every time you say okay, Google perks up. Not okay Google, but every time you say okay. So if you ever use the word okay in your conversations, Google's listening. Another thing you might want to think about is IP cameras. They're really very popular. You can buy them for less than $50, and they transmit over the web, and you can watch them on your phone, and so you can monitor what's happening at your business or your home. And one of the biggest manufacturers of these cameras is a company called Hikvision, and they're watching you. And Hikvision is owned by the Chinese government. They put $6 billion into Hikvision. They have 28,000 employees. It's a $26 billion industry. It's growing at double digits. And it's really cool technology, except for maybe one minor setback. The fact is that when the US State Department installed these cameras in Kabul in the embassy, they discovered that the video being recorded somehow was making its way back to China. So you may not be important enough for the Chinese to spy on you, but if you have a Hikvision camera, or what's called in the US EasyViz, then they can. And that's not necessarily a good thing. So all this stuff I talked to you about is really what's happening, kind of in the digital space, in the digital world. This is all data that's being collected about you and your behavior and where you go. But there's other data about you which is really important too. In 1990, the US government set out to unlock the human genome. They said it was going to take 15 years. Well, thankfully it took 13 years, and it came in under budget. Instead of $3 billion, we spent $2.7 billion. It's a pretty good deal. So 3 billion base pairs of DNA are unlocked in the human genome, and we're off to the races. You know how long it takes today to unlock or to sequence a human genome with the compute power we have? It doesn't take 15 years or 13 years. It takes 26 hours, and it costs $1,000. So you have to ask the question, if it costs $1,000 and it takes 26 hours, how can 23andMe charge $79 to sequence the human genome? Anne Wojcicki, who started 23andMe, was married to Sergey Brin. Sergey Brin is the founder of Google. Is Google a search company? No, Google's a data company. Google collects data, and they sell that data to help people market. Well, Anne Wojcicki wants to be the Google of you. They want to be the Google of DNA. They've already got 2 million records in there. And there's a lot of great stuff that's going to come out of it. Do you have a propensity for breast cancer or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's? That's really great. And your stuff can also be used to research cures for really important diseases. She's making money by partnering with 30 life sciences companies who are using her pooled DNA set to do research and discovery. But other things could happen if it's not done properly. For instance, you not getting a job because of some disease you might have, or you having a different insurance rate because of some disease you might have. So the thing about data we have to think about is not people going out to try and maliciously do something wrong. It's really the unintended consequences that we have to be concerned about. Now, if at this point you realize that what I'm telling you is that there's a spy in your pocket, and there's a spy in your house, and just about everything there is to know about you is known, you might just say, well, I'm going to just check out. I'm going to throw this in the Charles, and I'm not going to be part of this anymore. Well, that's not good enough, because we now have 28,000 licensed drones in the United States. No, I'm sorry, 28,000 licensed pilots, 550,000 drones, 1,000 companies that are licensed to fly in US airspace. Entities like the DEA, the ATF, the FBI, local law enforcement are also flying these drones. And if they fly up at the observation deck of the Empire State Building, which is about 1,000 feet up, and they have a 1080p HD camera, they can look at your face and they know who you are. They can recognize your face for 1,000 feet away. You're not going to see them. You're not going to hear them. They can read the license plate on your car. So we are living in a state that is more highly surveilled than any time in history. So what's the summary of this? I mean, basically, they know who you are, where you live, where you work, where you play, how much you make, your gender, your age, your marital status, what you like, what you don't like, what you're shopping for, your political leanings, your interests, what you do for fun, where you dine. They know where you are, where you go, how fast you drive. They also know probably where you're going. Because look, we're habitual people. We have patterns. Every day, maybe you go to lunch at 1 o'clock or 12:30 and you go to one of 4 places. They can maybe notify you and say, hey, instead of going over to Chili's, why don't you come over here to Applebee's, I'll give you a 10% discount. So there's really valid uses for all this data, and a lot of companies are well-intentioned and they want to use it the right way. But doesn't it make you just a little bit uncomfortable that this much information about you is in the hands of corporations who are supposed to be looking out for your best interests? I mean, companies like this, who I think have the best intentions, but they make mistakes. Apple famously had their cloud hacked, and a bunch of celebrities were shocked to find out their photographs were in the wild. Google's been listening to people without them really knowing it. AT&T got fined $25 million for releasing 260,000 records incorrectly. Some individual at OkCupid released 70,000 records of members with username, gender, and sexual orientation, which is probably not a good thing. There's data scientists can look at Facebook profiles and determine what your sexual orientation is, which could be a really bad thing if you're gay and you live in Afghanistan, Qatar, or Saudi Arabia, or 7 other states, because it's punishable by death. So we need to think about what this data can do. And not just the data about you, but what happens when the data about you gets combined with all different other types of data, because that's what's happening. These gentlemen were part of the Tuskegee experiment. There were 600 sharecroppers in Georgia, 399 of which had contracted syphilis. This went on for 40 years. In 1972, it was discovered that the U.S. Health Services were conducting this survey to find out what happens. And even though penicillin was efficacious in curing and treating syphilis, they didn't bother to hand it to these poor gentlemen. And it wasn't just these men who suffered, it was their wives and children. 40 years. I bring this up because this is what instigated the development of the common rule. The common rule is what protects us every day. It's what guards clinical trials. So you have phase 1, which is basically do no harm. It's safety phase. All we want to do is make sure that nothing goes wrong in phase 1 of a clinical trial. Do we have phase 1 for data and the use of data? Do no harm is a really, really good mantra. Facebook's mantra is move fast and break things. All right? I mean, that's great if you're a 25-year-old hacker, but if you're controlling the fate of America's, liberty and privacy, and you're saying go fast and break things, that's not exactly the best way to go, in my opinion. So I believe that data is going to be misused. And I'm not saying it's going to be misused intentionally. I think it's more than likely going to be misused unintentionally. And we need to have an adult in the room. We need to have somebody whose job is not to determine how do we eke out a couple extra pennies in earnings at the end of the quarter. We need to have somebody sitting there and saying, hey, could this hurt somebody? Is this going to affect a group or a population or a city or a school? If we release all this information to ICE, or we could have a bunch of kids get picked up and sent out of the country tomorrow. These are the things we have to think about. And what has it got to be based on? It's going to be based on doing the morally correct thing, ethics, the difference between right and wrong. So we don't have data ethicists yet. They're just beginning. And when I spoke to the people at the Future Privacy Forum about this, they told me, when I said, what do we do about this? They said, we don't know. So I'm going to encourage you to do something about it. And what I want you to do is I want you to get educated. I want you to know what I know. I want you to go to Future Privacy Forum, the Electronic Frontier, the Center for Democracy and Technology, and just get up to speed about what's being done with your data and what do we have to do as citizens to protect ourselves about things going wrong. Because think about it. We are more highly surveilled today than in the history of the American people. Rosa Luxemburg said, and she was an 1800s activist in Russia, she said, those who do not move do not feel their chains. I think this is something we need to move on. Thank you very much.